Hello, I am Michael Collins, and this is Media Focus. Let's start off with another one of these kind of images, because I know you like them so much. What's going on in this image? What kind of processes are happening? Let's just take a quick look at it. Well, we have somebody on the left with a very 1970s haircut talking to someone on the right with a not particularly flattering haircut, and some kind of message, some kind of value, some kind of idea appears to be leaving the brain of the person on the left and transporting magically into the brain of the person on the right. Yeah, it doesn't quite stop there. After it reaches the ear, it goes somewhere else. What is the process which is going on here? What could we possibly be talking about? Well, the theory that we're going to be looking at in today's video is this idea of reception. So we are going to be looking at Stuart Hall's reception theory, also commonly known as the encoding/decoding model. So it's exactly as we just discussed just then. We have an encoder, we have somebody who presents an idea or perspective, and then we have a decoder, somebody who decodes or picks apart the message, ideology or perspective, and works out their own take on it. As we go through this video, we're going to be looking at Stuart Hall's ideas of the preferred, negotiated, oppositional, and perhaps aberrant reading, if I can remember to actually cover that. And we are going to be taking a look at the question which might appear in the exam. In what ways can audiences interpret Assassin's Creed in different ways? What is the preferred ideological perspective of the producer? So this is the kind of question that you might get in the exam. And if you do, it's probably going to be like a 12 marker, a 15 marker. So not an awful lot of time in order to answer something like this, about 12 minutes or 15 minutes. So what is the kind of stuff that you should be talking about in the exam? Well, let's go into some detail. So first of all, let's start off with this idea of the encoding and the decoding model. And before we go any further, we need to discuss the ideological perspective of the producer. Now, an ideology is a series of messages or values. And the producer is the person or group of people or company which make a media product. Now, just reading from my own slide here, the ideological perspective of the producer is encoded in every media product that we see through media language. So this is one of the reasons why I keep banging on about things like shot types and camera angles and editing and all that stuff, because it isn't just there to look nice for the producer, and it isn't just there so we can point it out when we are doing texture analysis. Things like shot types, editing, mise-en-scène, camera angles, soundtrack, diegesis for sound and all that stuff also demonstrates how the producer has encoded their ideological perspective. And every single last media product that we look at will contain what we call a mediated perspective of reality. So mediation is essentially a process of negotiation. It is a process of a kind of understanding which the producer will come to when they present their ideological perspective. And every media product we look at is biased. It makes assumptions, and it will reflect and demonstrate the biases of the ideological goals of the producer. So let's just take a quick look at an example of this. So this is the front page of, at the time of making this video, today's edition of the Daily Mirror. And I'm just going to focus, I'm going to miss out on these puff pieces up the top here. I'm just going to focus instead on the headline, on the main article here. So, school's virus fear is presented in red text and in capitals. And the use of language here demonstrates the ideological perspective of the producer, the idea that we are in this scary time, the idea that the virus is something to be feared. And we also see through the use of the combination of language here, the use of the word school and virus here creates a binary opposition which emphasizes this notion of fear, of threat and danger for the audience. Next, the actual headline itself, which demonstrates and operates on a direct mode of address, not to the audience here, although it basically is talking to the audience, but it is also talking to the Minister Michael Gove at the same time as well. So, are our kids safe or not, Mr. Gove? It is a fairly straightforward and blunt mode of address. The use of the term Mr. Gove there demonstrates a notion of respect and the idea that this person is in a position of power. However, this is underlined and undermined by the assumption or the notion being presented that children are currently not safe in the UK due to the COVID-19 crisis. The additional quotes, the additional information at the bottom, top Tory says schools are absolutely safe, then seconds later backtracks. Now, the newspaper didn't need to point out this backtracking. It doesn't actually go into detail here. We need to read the article about what this backtrack is. But this demonstrates and this mediates to the target audience this idea that the top Tory, i.e. the right-leaning Conservative Party, are currently in some state of shambles and they don't know exactly what they're doing. So this idea that Michael Gove has said schools are absolutely safe but then backtracks demonstrates to the audience the ideological perspective that he is somebody who cannot be trusted. Then right next to that, Labour, test and trace must be in place to ease parent and teacher fears. Once more, a binary opposition has been constructed. This idea that on the one hand, we have the Tories, the Conservative Party, who are backtracking, who are untrustworthy. And on the right, we have Labour, who are presenting a straightforward plan, this idea of test and trace. And this, in turn, will be able to ease parent and teacher fears. So hopefully we've kind of guessed by now the ideological perspective of the Daily Mirror. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The Daily Mirror is a left-leaning tabloid. So by being a tabloid newspaper, it's communicating to a predominantly working class audience. But this newspaper is going to be by and large supportive of the left-wing Labour Party, and by and large is going to be consistently critical of the right-wing Conservative Party. So what we have here is an excellent example of Stuart Hall's notion of mediation. We have the facts, we have the quotes here. However, things have been flipped. Things have been changed, and we can see the ideological perspective of the newspaper. This idea that the Tory party are in shambles, that they're backtracking on themselves. And we can even see like the use of anchorage here, the selection of the image of Michael Gove. Well, that's not a particularly flattering image of him. He kind of looks faintly evil and faintly creepy. The image taken of him kind of makes him look quite emotionless, quite maybe even evil, although it doesn't actually say this. And this is further anchored through the use of the caption underneath the image, U-turn, which again reinforces and cultivates this notion that the Tory party are currently in shambles and they don't really know what they're doing. So if we compared this newspaper to, for example, the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph, which are both right-wing daily newspapers in the United Kingdom, we would see a very, very different perspective of this, and probably something much, much more sympathetic to the idea of letting students back into schools. And we can see exactly how much this is affecting you right now, this idea of mediation. Now, if we're to think about the last theory that we looked at, i.e. Albert Bandura, and this idea of the effects model, well, for Bandura, we would look at this and we would accept it. Are our kids safe or not, Mr. Gove? Oh, what an evil man. Nope, that's absolutely terrible. He's done a complete U-turn, the Tory party are in shambles. And that is the only perspective that we can get from this. However, according to Stuart Hall, it doesn't just stop with the encoding of the message by producers. In fact, it goes a lot further than this because audiences can decode this message. So, unlike passive theories of audience, for example, Bandura's effects model, reception theory argues that audiences are active and that they can decode media messages in a variety of different ways. So we as an audience don't just have to sit there like a doormat and take it. We might agree with the ideology, we might completely disagree with the ideology, but even more importantly, we can negotiate this mediated ideological perspective. We can say, yes, I agree with certain aspects. However, on the other hand, I completely disagree with other aspects. And this is what makes Stuart Hall's reception theory so very interesting to media students and, of course, to media teachers as well. We absolutely love it. So there are three broad readings that audiences can make of an ideological perspective presented by a media product. So the first reading we're going to look at is this idea of the preferred reading or the dominant reading. And this is where the audience will agree with the dominant ideological perspective encoded by the producer. So, for example, if we were to accept the dominant reading of the Daily Mirror front page that we just looked at, then we would agree that the Tory party are in shambles, and we would agree that the Labour Party are the political party who could get us out of this situation. That is the message which is being presented there. On the other hand, we also have the oppositional reading, and this is where the audience disagrees with the ideological perspective of the producer. Now, let's say if you do support the Conservative Party and you vote Conservative, and maybe you really like Michael Gove, then you would disagree with the ideological perspective. You might consider, well, this is a very, very difficult situation for anybody to be in. I don't actually think that he U-turned, and quite frankly, I think the Daily Mirror are using quite manipulative language. I completely disagree with what I'm reading. I hate the Daily Mirror. That might be an example of an oppositional reading. So far, these two readings, yeah, I agree, yeah, I disagree, have been quite straightforward. But there's a third reading that audiences can make. And this is the negotiated reading. So this is where the audience agrees with certain ideological aspects of the media product while dismissing and disagreeing with other aspects of the media product. So in other words, we as an audience can negotiate things. We don't just have to say, yeah, I totally agree with what this is saying, or no, I totally disagree with what this is saying. In fact, our responses can actually be very complicated. Now, Stuart Hall goes into some detail about the different things that can lead us to these negotiated readings. So one of which might be our political views and ideologies, as we've just seen, but other things might include our age, our ethnicity, our nationality, and our social class, which may and may not involve exactly how much money we earn as well. So all these different things can come together, a level of education as well, really, really important. And these things can come together in order for audiences to negotiate different readings of the dominant ideology which is being presented. So if all this sounds a little bit complicated, it's not really. It's just basically, do the audience agree with, disagree with, or are they somewhere in the middle of their response to a media product? And the negotiated reading is by far the most common reading. And by and large, we don't just tend to completely blindly follow media products. So this is very, very much going against Bandura's idea, this idea that we're zombies. No, we're not. We are active in our roles as media consumers. So, we talked a little bit about newspapers. Well, how can we apply this idea to the Assassin's Creed franchise? How can we apply these notions of preferred, negotiated, oppositional, and aberrant readings, or go into exactly what that is in just a second, to the Assassin's Creed franchise? So, one of the biggest dominant ideological perspectives of the Assassin's Creed franchise is that violence is justified and violence is acceptable. And this is for two reasons. One, diegetically, or in the world of the narrative, it is justified because it furthers a political or an ideological cause. So, for example, in the game Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, we have a mixed-race former slave who is fighting in order to avenge her family. So in this case, the idea is that the violence being perpetrated by the protagonist and also by the audience is justified because it furthers a political or ideological cause. It's not just mindless violence. It's not just something like Doom or something like that. Although in Doom, you need to kill all the demons because you need to escape from Mars and hell. Another ideological perspective which the Assassin's Creed franchise really likes to hammer home is this idea that violence is not only acceptable, but it's also fun and enjoyable. And this is what we call extradiegetic. So this isn't actually in the world of the narrative. We can assume that the character in the game is not actually enjoying having to commit these acts of violence. But we as an audience, however, can take pleasure in the acts of violence. It's fun to climb around. It's fun to kill people in video games. And if that makes me sound a little bit psychotic, this is because that when we do play video games, we negotiate them. We realize that we are not actually playing an accurate representation of real life, but we are playing a game. And it's very, very similar to something like an 80s action film or like John Wick or something like that, where he runs around and blows everyone up. And it's all, frankly, a bit of a laugh. However, that would be my reading of these games. And other audiences might come up with completely different readings of these games. So an oppositional reading of Assassin's Creed would be that violence can never ever be justified, even if it's for a political cause. And the violence in this game glorifies violence, and it makes light of not only political issues, not only the idea of violence, but it also makes light of notions of historical accuracy. This idea that you can go back in time and murder people simply for the fun of the audience. However, the preferred reading of this would be that yes, it is acceptable in many instances to commit acts of violence for ideological causes. And quite frankly, this is a video game. It's not real life, and it is an enjoyable activity to climb up a wall and to murder someone in a video game before sneaking off, because it is not real life and audiences can negotiate this. Maybe somewhere in the middle we can have a negotiated reading. So this idea that maybe you might find the idea of violence acceptable in some situations, but then the same audience might find this idea of violence in the game, they might find the depiction of it over the top and graphically upsetting, which would be an excellent example of a negotiated reading. One final reading that we haven't talked about is the aberrant reading. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but essentially the aberrant reading is where an audience completely doesn't get the point. So they might completely misinterpret the game. So someone with an aberrant reading may well not realize that it's a video game, or an aberrant reading of Assassin's Creed would be to use the game in order to practice techniques to kill people in real life, which is quite obviously absolutely repulsive, and basically no one's going to do that apart from certain people who might have mental health issues. And we have talked about that before when we talked about video games and the effects model. So negotiation, reception theory, it's a pretty great theory, and it can be utilized for pretty much any product that we look in media studies. However, it does have a couple of issues. So one big issue with reception theory is that it's very, very much based on this idea of media products having a dominant ideology. And certain theorists, for example, David Gauntlet and his theories around identity, and Henry Jenkins and his theories around fandom, both suggest that actually audiences don't really care about dominant ideologies a lot of the time. They don't really care what it is that the producer actually wanted to point out in the first place. So, for example, with Henry Jenkins, we can play games however we want, and then we can go online and we can make videos about them, and we can completely ignore what the game is actually supposed to be about or how it's supposed to be played. So different audiences can play and use video games in completely different ways, and this goes on to any other form of media as well. We can interpret media products in any way in which we want to. So potentially this is a big issue of reception theory and this idea of media negotiation. However, in general, it's a really, really compelling theory. It's a very, very useful theory. There's not a whole lot wrong with it. And I really, really do encourage you to point out preferred, negotiated and oppositional readings in the media products that you analyze for audience questions in the exam.